Most people think that being quiet means you are weak, but sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the keys. My name is Thomas, and I spent years tending to flowers in the shadow of my wealthy stepson, only for him to realize too late that the dirt he wanted to throw me out of was legally mine. I always liked the smell of damp soil early in the morning. Every day, I woke up at 5 o'clock to tend to the gardens on the 50-acre estate. I took care of the roses, the hydrangeas, and the large vegetable patch near the southern woods. For me, working with my hands was a way to find peace. My tools were old, but I kept them clean and sharp. I lived in a small, weathered cottage at the very edge of the property. It was a simple place with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a porch that looked out over the valley. My grandfather built this cottage with his own hands. My family had owned this land for 3 generations, long before the big mansion was ever built on the hill. But over the years, the world around us changed. When I was younger, I met a wonderful woman named Helen. She was smart, driven, and had a great mind for business. Helen started a luxury home decor and staging company that eventually became very successful. We fell in love and got married. Because we loved this land, we decided to build a large mansion on the hill so Helen could host her business clients. But before we built anything, my family's lawyer made sure we did things the right way. We signed a prenuptial agreement, and we registered a life estate deed. Since our family land was originally part of the older district, these documents were filed in the archives of the neighboring county vault. Helen understood this and respected it completely. She knew the land belonged to my family, and she was happy to build our life together on it. We had a peaceful marriage for over 20 years. But Helen also had a son from a previous marriage, a boy named Julian. Julian was always different from his mother. He cared a lot about status, expensive clothes, and showing off his wealth to others. When Helen passed away after a long illness, my world went quiet. I missed my wife terribly, and I retreated even further into my gardening. Julian immediately took over his mother's home decor business. He moved into the main mansion on the hill and began running the company from the grand study. Almost overnight, his attitude toward me changed. He did not see me as his stepfather, or even as a person who had loved his mother. To Julian, I was just a slow, quiet old man who lived in a dusty cottage on what he thought was his property. He believed his mother owned the entire 50-acre estate outright and had left it all to him in her will. Julian did not know about the original land registries or the prenuptial agreement. He never checked the historic archives in the neighboring county. He only looked at the local online database, which listed the mansion under his mother's business name. Because of this, Julian treated me like an unwanted stray dog living on his land. The first major sign of trouble started during the spring. Julian began hosting wealthy investors and clients at the mansion to help save the business, which was struggling under his management. One afternoon, I was walking near the main driveway carrying a tray of young tomato plants. Julian was standing outside with 2 men in expensive suits. When he saw me in my dirty overalls and worn boots, his face turned red with embarrassment. He walked over to me, blocking my path. He told me that I was ruining the look of the estate. He said his clients did not want to see a dirty old gardener wandering around the property. He ordered me to stay near my cottage and to never come near the main house when he had guests. I did not argue with him. I just nodded, carried my plants back to my garden, and kept my head down. As the months went by, Julian's business problems grew worse. He was losing clients to younger, more modern design companies in the city. He decided that he needed to make the estate look even more luxurious to impress his wealthy business partners. He wanted to build a professional-grade clay tennis court on the property. The only flat, open area with the perfect soil and sunlight was the exact spot where my cottage stood. One hot Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting on my front porch drinking a glass of cold water. I saw Julian walking down the gravel path toward my cottage. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his face looked tense and angry. He did not greet me. Instead, he walked right up to my porch steps and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded white paper and threw it directly at my chest. The paper came loose and fell to the floor of my porch. He looked down at me and sneered. "Get your trash out of here, you dusty old tramp," Julian said, his voice loud and harsh. "You have no right to this land, and I need this space for my court." He told me I had exactly 30 days to pack up my things and leave. He said he had already hired a construction crew to demolish my cottage. I looked at the paper on the floor, and then I looked up at him. "This cottage has been here for a long time, Julian," I said quietly. "I do not care about your history," Julian replied. "My mother built this estate, and now it belongs to me. I am not going to let a lazy old man ruin my business opportunities." He turned on his heel and walked back up the hill toward the mansion. I picked up the paper from the porch floor. It was a formal eviction notice prepared by a local lawyer. I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees. I felt a deep sadness that Julian had turned out this way, but I also felt a strong sense of resolve. It was time to visit the neighboring county courthouse. The next morning, I put on my best clean shirt and drove my old pickup truck to the neighboring county seat. The drive took about 45 minutes through the winding country roads. The courthouse was a beautiful, old brick building that had been there since the late 1800s. I walked inside and went down to the basement archives where the historic land registry was kept. The clerk behind the desk was an older woman named Mrs. Gable. She recognized my family name immediately. I asked her to help me retrieve the original deeds and agreements for my property. She smiled and went into the back room. A few minutes later, she returned with a thick, dusty manila folder. Inside were the original land deeds from my grandfather's time. There was also the signed and notarized prenuptial agreement between Helen and me. And most importantly, there was the registered life estate deed. These documents prove that the entire 50-acre estate, including the land under the mansion, belonged strictly to me. Helen had only owned the physical structure of the mansion itself through her business, but the land lease had expired upon her death. According to the legal documents, the entire property reverted back to my sole ownership. Julian had absolutely no legal right to any part of the land. In fact, he was the one who was living there without a valid lease. I asked Mrs. Gable to make official, certified copies of all the documents. She stamped them with the gold seal of the county court. I thanked her and took the papers to a local real estate attorney named Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance was a sharp, professional man who had worked in the area for 30 years. I laid the documents on his desk and explained the situation. He read through the papers carefully, adjusting his glasses. A slow smile appeared on his face. "Your stepson did not do his homework," Mr. Vance said. "He assumed the local online registry was the complete record. But these historic deeds are absolute. He has no right to evict you, Thomas. In fact, legally, you have the right to evict him from the mansion." I told Mr. Vance that I wanted to handle this quietly but firmly. I did not want to cause a scene, but I needed to protect my home. We spent the next 2 hours preparing the necessary legal paperwork. Mr. Vance drafted a formal counter-eviction notice for Julian. He also contacted the regional sheriff's office to arrange for the official delivery of the papers. We set the date for the exact day Julian's eviction notice against me was supposed to take effect. During the next 3 weeks, I went about my daily routine as if nothing had changed. I watered my plants, pruned the bushes, and watched the clouds. Julian would occasionally drive past my cottage in his luxury sports car. Whenever he saw me, he would roll down his window and smirk. He thought he had won. He thought he was going to tear down my grandfather's cottage and build his tennis court. He even had a surveyor come out to mark the ground with pink flags. I did not touch the flags. I just watched and waited. Finally, the morning of the eviction day arrived. It was a gray, cool morning with a light drizzle of rain. At 9 o'clock, a large moving truck drove down the gravel road and parked near my cottage. Julian had hired them to throw my simple furniture out into the dirt. Julian walked down the hill from the mansion, wearing a heavy coat and a confident smile. He had a clipboard in his hand. "Are you ready to go, Thomas?" Julian called out as he approached. "The workers are here to clear out your junk." I was standing on my porch, holding a warm cup of coffee. "I am not going anywhere, Julian," I said calmly. Julian laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You do not have a choice," he said. "The law is on my side." Just then, 2 large vehicles drove down the long driveway from the main road. It was the regional sheriff and 2 deputies in their official cars. Julian's smile grew even wider. "Ah, the sheriff is here to help speed things up," Julian said. The sheriff, a tall man with a serious face, got out of the lead car. He carried a leather folder under his arm. He walked past Julian and stepped up onto my porch. "Are you Thomas?" the sheriff asked. "Yes, I am," I replied. "We have the certified court orders from the neighboring county registry," the sheriff said. He turned around and looked down at Julian, who was standing at the bottom of the steps. Julian looked confused. "Sheriff, you are supposed to be removing this man from my property," Julian said. "His time is up." The sheriff walked down the steps and stood directly in front of Julian. He pulled a set of papers from his leather folder and handed them to my stepson. "Actually, Julian, we are here to serve you," the sheriff said. "According to the original deeds and the prenuptial agreement, Thomas owns this entire 50-acre estate. You have no legal right to this land or the mansion. This is a formal eviction notice for you to vacate the premises immediately." Julian's jaw dropped. He looked at the papers, his face turning pale. "This is impossible," Julian shouted. "My mother owned this place. She left it to me in her will." "Your mother owned the business, Julian," the sheriff explained calmly. "But the land belongs to Thomas's family. The mansion was built on a land lease that ended when your mother passed away. You are currently trespassing." Julian began to shake with anger and fear. He looked up at me on the porch, his eyes wide. "You did this," Julian hissed. "You planned this." I walked down the steps of my porch and stood near the sheriff. I looked at Julian, seeing the desperation in his eyes. He had spent so much time trying to look important that he never bothered to learn the truth. "You wanted to clear the trash, Julian," I said quietly. "So start packing your bags." The deputies did not wait. They walked up the hill to the mansion and began their work. Within an hour, they were carrying Julian's expensive Italian leather chairs out onto the wet driveway. They brought out his modern desks, his designer clothes, and his fancy electronics. Everything was piled onto the driveway under the light rain. Julian stood there in the damp air, watching his life's possessions get piled up like garbage. He tried to call his lawyer, but his lawyer told him the same thing. The documents were old, legal, and completely ironclad. There was nothing they could do. Julian had to hire the moving truck he had brought for me to carry his own belongings away. He looked completely defeated as the truck drove out of the estate gates. But Julian did not give up easily. He was a proud man, and his business was on the line. He spent the next year trying to fight the deed in court. He hired expensive lawyers from the city to find a loophole in the prenuptial agreement. But my lawyer, Mr. Vance, defended our case with ease. Every court appearance ended the same way. The judges looked at the original 3-generation deed and the clear terms of the contract and dismissed Julian's claims. The constant legal battles drained what little money Julian had left. His business, already weak from his poor management, finally went bankrupt. He had to sell his expensive cars and his designer watches just to pay his legal fees. Eventually, he was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment in the noisy part of the city. He no longer had a mansion to show off to his clients. He had to work a regular job just to make ends meet. After the legal dust settled, I finally had the quiet I had wanted for so long. I decided not to live in the giant mansion myself. It was too big for one old man, and it held too many memories of Julian's anger. Instead, I rented the mansion to a peaceful local historical society that turned it into a museum. I stayed in my comfortable, weathered cottage at the edge of the property. I used the money from the museum rent to restore the estate to its natural beauty. I removed the pink surveyor flags and the plans for the clay tennis court. I replanted the fields with beautiful, native wildflowers that my wife Helen had loved. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evening, I do not hear the noise of business meetings or sports cars. I only hear the wind through the trees and the birds in the garden. Sometimes, people think that being humble means you can be pushed around. But the earth does not move for those who stamp their feet. It belongs to those who care for it, tend to it, and know its history. Taking care of what is yours with patience and respect is the greatest strength a person can have. If this story resonated with you, Join our channel by liking and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.